Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Trishul recently passed the CFP exam. And so, in this episode, Aaron and Trishul discuss why the CFP is so important. They discuss the Certified Financial Planner exam, continuing education requirements, the Code of Ethics, and the fiduciary standard. While the CFP is not as academically rigorous as many formal postgraduate degrees, it is ideally suited for personal financial planning. Further, the breadth and depth of examination material help CFPs uncover and transform planning-related unknown unknowns into known unknowns. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Agti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey Aaron, great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. So recently, Trishul just passed the CFP examination, the long, arduous test for the Certified Financial Planner. So first of all, congratulations, Trishul. This is very exciting.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
So as I've been talking to Trishul for a while, and I know he's been studying for the CFP, and we've been talking about he has so much of history as a hedge fund manager on the investment side and incorporating personal financial advice. But he still, even though he had all this experience, he still wanted to pursue the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner designation. And it reminded me that when I talk to prospective clients, especially if they're interviewing other advisors, I'll point out usually two main things. One, that advisors should have a CFP. Because of the examination requirement and continuing education, there's enough technical knowledge that a CFP should be able to help most clients. But I usually emphasize that when you're interviewing an advisor, you really need to be comfortable talking to that individual person. You have to have that personal connection, that chemistry, because so many of the conversations between an advisor and client are really, really almost intimate. It's when people are talking about their money, they're usually talking about things that they've never discussed with anyone else except their spouse. And I'd really emphasize that when finding a financial advisor, being really comfortable that you are willing to share all of those personal financial details is really important. And as I was thinking about Trishul passing the CFP, I realized I usually kind of glossed over that first component of the advisor you hire should have a CFP. And today I want to actually spend more time examining that, especially in light of Trishul passing the examination. We wanted to go into kind of what are the benefits of a certified financial planner. What are the reasons why I've been saying for years that clients looking to hire a financial advisor should be looking for a certified financial planner? So, Trishul, I mentioned the examination requirements and continuing education. From a high level, your first thought, it's almost, even though you had already had all this experience, you've already been building a business, you know that you can provide good advice to clients. So one, why did you choose to pursue the CFP? Kind of go through that extra work and all that extra studying. And what is kind of the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the benefits of the CFP and how that helps you provide advice to clients?
Right. So as I started getting into this space, it was a little bit of a transition because, as you had mentioned, being on the other side of the investing space in the hedge fund world, it's not exactly a scenario where you're talking one-on-one with clients about planning their future lives. It's more about coming up with different strategies that are designed to provide some sort of esoteric return stream for clients, and then developing models that can hopefully do that across various market environments. So it's definitely a different look and feel in terms of investment advice. And at the same time, the actual clients are a different set of clients. The breadth and depth of clients range from institutions who are can be pension funds, endowments, and foundations, or it can be high net worth clients, or typically that they try to be in a group of investors known as sophisticated investors or qualified investors. So these are investors that have some sort of knowledge or backing to be making these types of investments in these less known types of in basically alternative investment styles. And from that perspective, it doesn't really go into the big thing that the CFP focuses on, which is planning. So as far as the planning side of the equation, in order to operate in this space, you do require licensing. So one thing that I did end up getting early on is something known as the Series 65. So this is a license that's put forward as far as the regulatory body to be able to provide advice. And it goes deep into, or it gives you a good idea of what's required in terms of, the high level of what's, basically the baseline to be able to give advice to somebody. But the CFP takes it to a whole nother level. It takes it to the level where you really want to understand what are the key components that an individual needs to come up with a plan across all the various buckets and all the various goals and all the various scenarios that might come up with an individual. And it really tries to hone in on here's the things that are quite important to understand. So I think the rigor that I quickly started to understand that this type of certification would bring to the process, especially when it comes to planning. It's in the name, CFP, P for planning. I think that's where I saw the great value.
That's a great perspective. And I think that there's a couple things to kind of unpack there, that the CFP really has truly designed their curriculum and all of the requirements to be for kind of individual households. It's the truly on the personal financial planning side. And we can see that even when we look at just retirement planning, where when large institutions, insurance companies, pensions, endowments, when they're doing their actuarial calculations, they can actually depend on the law of large numbers and average life expectancy to kind of do their math, and they can actually get really, really accurate. But for the personal side, we can't depend on anything like that. We have to kind of plan for the possibility that they live significantly longer than average life expectancy. And kind of as you compared and contrasted that, that's a really good point. Even though your experience was working within investments and you understood kind of investment strategies, asset allocation, tax strategies, it was designed for larger institutions, whereas the CFP really is designed for just every other individual planning for their own personal lives. That is a good distinction, that there are other accreditations, there are other designations, there's other education programs, but for us working with individual clients and all the things that go into their personal lives, the CFP really is the gold standard from that perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And there are certainly other designations out there that you'll see in the advice space, but when it really comes to household planning metrics and household planning concerns, the CFP, it certainly stands out from that regard.
So I think the other thing I mentioned was the Series 65. I also have that. In a past life, I also had a Series 7 and a Series 24. I think you had a Series 3, I believe, as a CTA.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's a good point. I'm kind of glad you brought that up. The Series 65 is kind of providing advice I think the Series 3 was dealing with commodities. Series 7 that I had. Did you have a Series 7 when you were working for the hedge fund?
No, it was an RIA.
Okay. So the Series 7 is what allows you to be a registered representative of a broker-dealer where you can actually sell investment products. So classically, it was you wanted to be a stockbroker and collect a commission on each stock trade, then you had to have a Series 7. So uh, it has evolved into if you wanted to sell mutual funds, if you wanted to sell any variable life insurance. So it'd be life insurance that also has an investment component, and the investments are not just growing at fixed cash values, but actually growing with market values. These were all Series 7, and it's a pretty good, rigorous test, but it really was that designed to sell commission-based investment products, whereas the Series 65 was really focused on the advice side. And then I had a Series 24, which was allowed you to supervise other Series 7s. So that is one of the things that it is kind of difficult for people to understand. It's like, oh, we have a wide variety of series numbers under what was the NASD, the National Association of Securities Dealers, when I took it, and they merged with, I think they merged with the New York Stock Exchange to create FINRA, which is like Financial Regulatory Agency. And so there's a variety of series, but yeah, it's kind of focusing on kind of like how a CFA, so if you get I think it's a chartered financial analyst, really is focused on investments. That I'm actually someone who does work for one of those endowments, those pensions. If you're doing stock analysis, a CFA would be a really good designation and education. And Molly, who's been on our podcast, has both a CFA and a CFP. And it was hard for most people to understand the distinction, but I think that's a really good point. We could have pursued a CFA, but that's for picking stocks within a mutual fund or within a pension or a large endowment, or analyzing other investments. Because we want to work with individuals and we want to focus on financial planning, that Series 65, which focuses on advice and not selling investment products, and the CFP, that again focuses on the financial planning, not picking stocks on their behalf, is that a kind of ideal combination. So it's almost like we have a like self-selection bias, whereas we're not saying the CFP is the best thing out there with every other designation and a series of examination requirements under FINRA. It's if you want to do financial planning work for individual households, then the CFP is best. So because we've chosen the path of how we want to help people, that's why we got the CFP as opposed to the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it comes down to, what are we trying to do with our business and who are we trying to serve? And you kind of go through the matrix of, what makes the most sense in that situation, and you kind of land on the CFP.
So since I took the CFP over 10 years ago, so I don't remember I actually remember for me, the examination took 2 days. It was I think 3 or 4 hour long sessions. You had lunch in between on a Saturday, Sunday. I had to go to San Jose State University, which is it's not super close, but it was like a 45-minute drive for me. And I had to do a paper and pencil test with Scantron, so it took me a while to get my results. But they've improved their technology, so yeah, I know you get to take it on a computer. But as you went through studying for the exam and or taking the exam itself, what are some of the things that you learned or realized that you didn't anticipate going into the process?
I think two high-level things come to mind. One is I wanted to have a good comprehensive understanding of all the things that could come up. And, not necessarily to be an expert in all the little things, because some of these things do frankly go pretty deep. Because you're going to go deep into tax stuff to the point where you want to be knowledgeable, but you're not going to go to the point where you can start filing somebody's taxes. That's what your CPA is for. And then there's a good amount of stuff in the estate planning area where you want to understand, what are all the various different types of constructs that you might think about when it comes to an estate plan. There's all these various trusts and all these various flavors of trusts. And again, it can go pretty deep, but again, we're not going to go so deep that you're going to start creating trust documents. That's what the attorneys are for. But at the end of the day, it's good to understand what these two groups of individuals are going to bring to the table, and what makes sense from your situation is providing that bridge between the client and the CPA and the client and the attorney. So I think at a high level, just understanding all the little pieces at a level such that you can see, turn those unknown knowns into, more known unknowns, or, known knowns is kind of how I might think about it. Not necessarily to become an expert in all those nuances. Although, the second thing that also comes to mind is there are a bunch of legacy things that if you're working in a day-to-day environment that you may not see now and then, but it's good to understand the history of how we got to where we are. There's some really nuanced things with the way our tax situation is set up and how it's kind of evolved, and how there are some things, for example, with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was put through during the Trump administration. It had all of these various hacks put in place, and you need to understand how that kind of flows through. And then you kind of also need to understand some of these things have time horizons where it's going to go back to the old way. And so you kind of need to know that old way. So I think those types of things are something that you may not kind of pick up in your day-to-day, more temporal, picture of just working with clients. It's something that, again, there's some history and there's some knowledge where it's good to kind of fill in those puzzle pieces.
That's a great point. Like, think about the history and how we got here. So because my wife's in computer engineering, she's a director over managers now, but her history is as a coder. She has described a few times, like, I think it was Apple, like, starts from scratch with their code base every 3 years or something like that. And I might be getting the name of the company and the number of years wrong, but it's like most other companies, it's like it takes extra time to delete the old stuff, so they just kind of add on top of it. And like that kind of happens with a lot of the tax code, where every time Congress passes a law, they don't really remove the old stuff. It's still there, just most times it doesn't apply. I think about, like, recently we talked about the Coverdell education IRAs, and that was just last week. Like, yes, those exist still, but they're basically inferior to 529 plans in pretty much every way. So we would never actually recommend a Coverdell education IRA, but they still exist. Like, the laws are still on the books, and so you could open a Coverdell IRA. And this feels a little bit like that, where I think about the backdoor Roth strategy. This comes from the idea that there have been IRA limits, or sorry, income limits to be able to make Roth IRA contributions. Those laws are still on the books. Those laws have been on the books for basically since Roth IRAs were first created. It's actually named after, I think, a senator named Roth, whose last name was Roth. That's where the name comes from. But there were also used to be the same income limits on Roth conversions. Basically, you couldn't put money into a Roth if you earned too much. And in the I think it was I'm going to get this wrong. I forget the name of the act, but it was the tax code under Bush 2, that had this 2010 expiration. And so 2010 actually had no estate tax that year. And I remember like the biggest example was George Steinbrenner, the former owner of the Yankees, passed away in 2010. And so even though he owned the Yankees, is worth more than $1 billion, his beneficiaries didn't pay estate taxes because Congress couldn't figure out if they should actually change that. Also in 2010, there were no income restrictions on Roth conversions. So before then, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to plan out how do we take advantage of this 2010 sunset where there's no income restrictions on Roth conversions. After 2010, Congress kind of changed laws, and so I think I don't remember off the top, there might have been no income limits on Roth contributions either. But in 2011, they enacted a new tax code, so the income restrictions on Roth contributions came back into play, but the income restrictions on Roth conversions did not come back into play. And so now you had this, what was a loophole, kind of, you couldn't make a Roth contribution if you earned too much, but you could make a non-deductible after-tax contribution to a traditional IRA because there weren't any income restrictions on that, and then do a Roth conversion to a Roth IRA because there's no income restrictions on that. And many advisors, and there's a lot of legal commentary, kind of were going back and forth on, is this legal? Because both steps were legal. The IRS had something called a step-through doctrine that said if you take two steps that are designed to be one, then the IRS is allowed to interpret those two steps as that one step. And it's kind of was penalizing people for making illegal Roth IRA contributions. And so there's gray areas where some advisors will recommend, okay, but if you wait a month and get a new statement, then those are two separate steps. Or should you wait a year and you make your non-deductible after-tax traditional IRA contribution at the same time you do a Roth conversion of last year's non-deductible after-tax traditional IRA contribution. And this is kind of went back and forth until the IRS kind of finally gave their approval, I think via a letter ruling, that, okay, yes, backdoor Roths are allowed. They'll not violate the step-through doctrine. But to this day, Congress still hasn't kind of unified those two steps in terms of the tax code. So you still, if you are over the income limits and you can't make a Roth IRA contribution, you still have to go through those two steps. And this is just one specific example of so many things that change and evolve over time, that the old stuff doesn't go away. It's still there. And I remember the CFP teaching me about some of those older things, like, this doesn't apply, you're never going to use this, but you need to know it just in case a client comes along that already has this. And you learn a wide variety of retirement plans, especially available to small businesses, different trusts. Like, I still remember reading and learning about the Rabbi Trust that was available to members of the clergy as a retirement plan to provide tax benefits, but have never actually seen anyone who has anything that looks like that. The closest would be a non-qualified deferred compensation plan at some companies that I have seen. But there was a variety of things I remember having to learn just in case it comes up, like, here's what has happened in the past, so that you can understand it when you see it, but also understand why we don't use that anymore moving forward, because there's something else that's in place. Do you have any other examples that come to mind of either history or something you felt you had to learn but don't anticipate ever actually using?
Yeah, I think the rabbi trust is an interesting one. Frankly, that was a question that I had for you, Aaron. Have you ever seen one of those things? Because I'm that does go through my mind. Like, do these things even come up anymore, or are they so esoteric that you may go your whole career before one of them pops up? Another one that came to mind is the modified endowment contract that the CFP loves to kind of pull that out of a red hat. But the notion there is that there used to be a slight loophole where if you're investing in a life insurance product, the notion is that you get a certain tax benefit because you get this notion of tax deferred growth, in air quotes, if you follow the rules. And the idea there is you're putting money in terms of premium, and then over time it's growing, and then you have the option to take out money if you follow a few stipulations early, either through loans or other sorts of dividends. However, there a kind of workaround that people were kind of using is they were front loading these life insurance products by paying, all the premium upfront, for example, and then getting that tax deferred growth and then using that money for other various things, not necessarily for the life insurance purpose. And then when the government realized this, they passed the Tamara Act of 1988 that said, hey, if you do that, we're going to put extra constraints on when you take out that money. We're going to tax it differently and make it less advantageous for you to try to pull off this type of strategy. So the notion is, if you front load a life insurance policy after 1988, it's going to be called something like a modified endowment contract, a MEC, and it's going to have to follow a different set of tax rules. However, if you had purchased the product before 1988, then you're kind of grandfathered in and you'll be following the old tax way. And it just had me thinking, well, okay, so 1988, it's 2021, that's over 30 years ago. How many of these might be floating in the wild that we have to think about two different ways of tax codes? But frankly, if you think about it, if somebody did purchase these in their 20s or 30s in the 80s, then yeah, now's about the time where these might start rearing their head when these individuals are in their 60s or 70s, when the life insurance products were coming to a head. So it's interesting because it's just one of those things that you kind of have to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, when was this product purchased, and was it front loaded or not? And then, okay, now we'll follow these sets of rules. But really, Aaron, have you ever seen a non-MEC'd contract?
Uh, Short answer, actually, technically, yes, I have seen it. But it was so old that like we just didn't do anything with it. Uh, but also, I don't think it was at risk of becoming a mech, even if it was newer. And I have gone through a few cases where clients have a permanent life insurance policy. So the basic idea with the mech is that if you have $1 million insurance policy and you fund it enough that there's $100,000 of cash value, if you pass away, the insurance company pays out $1 million. But it's actually paying out your own $100,000 plus $900,000 of insurance company money. And because that's in a life insurance policy, if you want to take withdrawals against that or loans against that cash value, that can be considered tax-free. So the growth was already tax-deferred, and it's ways to get money out tax-free. But one of the things I have designed is that if you get to a point where you don't need $1 million in life insurance, and maybe it's in a situation where trying to take that money out might be kind of either more expensive or the taxes, if you cancel a permanent life insurance policy, may not be worth it either. One of the best things that we did was just you can lower the death benefit. So now you had $100,000 in cash value. If you lower the death benefit to $90,000, there's no kind of money at risk to the insurance company And so that's where you get a modified endowment contract. There always has to be some amount at risk to the insurance company for it to be considered insurance. Because if the insurance company is just going to pay you back your own money, that's not an insurance product. And so I have had relatively complex conversations with insurance companies and clients on the line of, okay, we don't need this insurance anymore, but taking it out will be too expensive in terms of surrender charges or taxes. So we want to reduce that death benefit down where the cash value can keep paying the cost of insurance each year. So it doesn't cost the client anything else, but we can't lower it too much because then it becomes a mech. And so it's one thing I've never kind of helped the client design that going in, but I have had client cases where they already have this policy in place, and it's like I have to know that mechs exist so that we don't either give them a huge tax bill or kind of unexpected costs, surrender charges, or some other kind of loss. So yeah, it's okay. We're going to reduce that down to a death benefit of 150,000, and the cash value will pay those premiums unless they need the money for something else. So yeah, it's one of those things like, yeah, you have to know about mechs, and that's why they put it on the CFP exam. Even though I've only dealt with it like 2 or 3 times in the last decade plus, it's the circumstances are so unusual that it rarely comes up. But yeah, you got to know about it.
Yeah, so it's these little things and the history behind them and the little gotchas that I think the CFP helps unravel. And the notion is that, in my mind, I was looking to not have little gaps like that. So that's what made me kind of more confident in pursuing this type of designation.
That's a good point. I think, like you said, it turns at the very least from unknown unknowns to known unknowns. That
Right.
you have now the resources when something comes up, you can start kind of going down that path of refreshing your education and your knowledge. But at least you know, oh, I need to be on the lookout for this particular edge case.
Right. And of course, things evolve. So the good thing about the CFP designation is it does have a continuing education arm to it, where in order to maintain the designation, you need to, kind of keep up with a certain amount of hours of continuing education, so that you can kind of just be on top of the changing environment.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's a uh, one of the reasons why uh, I, I've evolved a little bit where I'm always paying attention to things, but now it's kind of if I'm doing this research and reading this anyways, does this source provide continuing education? But yeah, that continuing education is a big requirement. And actually, one of the things is they require an ethics lesson or ethics course as part of the continuing education requirement. So you do have to go through an ethics course at least every 2 years. And I know they've updated the code of ethics, and I think they've updated, like, they implemented a new fiduciary standard. Um, I'm curious, like, do you know what the specific changes they have made that you've observed that might be different from when I took this exam?
I'm not sure if I know the exact delta, but in terms of what's there now, I think what they've tried to do is streamline it and simplify things. I think that's the kind of the vein I've seen. For example, with the code of ethics, just at a high level, in order to hold the CFP designation, you have to abide by the code of ethics, and the code itself, it's pretty short. So I'll just give the bullet points of what this kind of means. But at first, you need to act with honesty, integrity, competence, and diligence. And, that you kind of need to know what you're doing, or act as if you do. No, but you need to know what you're doing. The other main thing is you need to act in the client's best interests. you need to exercise due care. So, you have to give proper attention when it's needed. You also need to avoid or disclose and manage conflicts of interest. So, the notion here is there can be and there will be conflicts of interest where certain things that the client would want to know, you have to make that clear to the client that here's something you should probably know about our relationship. And part of the ethics is to make that clear. And also, you need to maintain confidentiality and protect the privacy of the client. Of course, that's a big thing with all the the private information that we deal with, and the fact that a lot of it is electronic and it's you know housed in various online sources. So we have to do a good job of making sure that it's safe and secure. And then, at the same time, the last one in the code of ethics is just act in a manner that reflects positively on the financial planning profession and the CFP designation itself. So the notion here is the CFP will also be kind of policing these ethics, and if there are violations, that they do actually um, you know, go after, in air quotes, the CFP individuals, and they can sanction and they can provide, they can also suspend CFP licenses or even revoke them. So that's something to understand. When it comes to the designation, the CFP really does mean that these code of ethics should definitely be followed.
Yeah, it's good. I think one of the bullet points that you stuck out that you pointed out that stuck out with me was the kind of integrity and competence. And I remember a big emphasis on my most recent continuing education with the ethics was kind of acknowledging your own limitations and kind of not trying to pretend that you know everything about everything, but along with kind of disclosing conflicts of interest, but it's like letting the clients know, yes, I know about ISOs and AMT and tax planning. I'm not a CPA, so I'm not going to prepare your taxes. I can't make the calculation that specific, but I can really help you put together an overall strategy. I am not a stock analyst, so I'm not going to make predictions on what your company's stock will do if it's going up or down moving forward, but I can help you understand the range of possibilities and plan around that. What does your life look like if the stock goes up? What does it look like if its stock goes down? What are the tax implications if it goes up, if it stays flat, if it goes down? But I have clients that one is not a US citizen, and so they have assets outside the US. They're a permanent resident and they have assets inside the US as well. And I've acknowledged I don't know enough about international tax law and bringing assets over to functionally provide advice on those assets and kind of incorporate that. If you kind of give me a rough dollar amount that we can plan around, I can help you plan using some kind of proxy. But I try to acknowledge I don't know enough about international tax law to help you with that. I try and do some research and here's a few resources I found that might be able to help you. But I think that for me, that's a specific example of that integrity and competence component is I can help you with this, but I have limitations to my expertise. And I can't functionally provide advice on these other things. And sometimes it might mean that we even go out and look for another advisor who does have that expertise. That's kind of within the code of ethics. If the client doesn't know the answers to their own situation, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, then we might have to go out and I might have to actually recommend hiring another advisor that does have that level of expertise. Now, in most of these cases, the bigger concern is their stock compensation at their current company. And so they can kind of take care of the assets outside the country and either bringing that in or transferring assets to another country. So they haven't asked me for help with those types of questions. They need my help with the equity compensation, but it might come up. And so that's one of the things of I have let them know and tried to disclose that, and I think that I really like that as part of the code of ethics, and that's a really good interpretation of that integrity and competence component. I was wondering if you had any specific examples of areas that you have kind of made sure to abide by the code of ethics that have stood out to you.
Yeah, I think, even the example that you mentioned with dealing with a client that has international affairs, it's something that has come up. And the notion is, yeah, that there's advisors out there who specialize in situations where you have expats across borders from country X to country Y, or country, A to country B, and, all those various permutations. And yeah, that's not me. But if a client runs into that situation, then yeah, I've had to say, well, yeah, it's going to get complicated. Here's what we can do with the US, but we need to fill in a gap of knowledge when it comes to this other country. And frankly, that's not my area of expertise. The kind of narrative I kind of bring to the table in general is that you can think of me like a generalist, like your general practitioner, right? You go in and you get your first level of diagnosis or your first level of insight. But often you might run into a situation where it's just too complicated. We need to get a referral to a cardiologist or pull in the urologist to see what they might make sense in terms of a more rigorous treatment plan for this specific situation. So yeah, if we need to pull in a estate planning attorney or a CPA or whatever it happens to be, it's interestingly enough, when it comes to recommendations, we are allowed to make recommendations, and I certainly do when it comes to other professionals, but we also need to do our own due diligence before we recommend. And that's also part of this code, meaning we need to understand the individual that we're recommending and provide some sort of understanding of why we think that individual is a good fit by doing our own due diligence on our end to understand whether this person that we're recommending is sensible in general and sensible for this situation. So I think the rigor that the ethics bring to even these kind of more nuanced types of situations is something that it's important to understand. It's not necessarily required to when giving advice, but it is for somebody with the CFP designation. And what I'd also say as it relates to that is, with these steps in terms of the designation itself and the code of ethics, it comes with a deeper level of steps to follow when it comes to the rigor, meaning the actual CFP designation has an outline of the process one needs to follow when providing advice, and also more granularly what steps to follow when providing the actual planning.
So, do you have any kind of specific thoughts or examples of that?
Yeah. So, when it comes to how we operate in general, there's duties that we have. And there's certain duties that we're required to follow at all times, whether it's advice or planning or just, having an intro meeting with a client where there's no relationship at all. And, most of those code of ethics apply just in general. We want to do right at all times. However, the CFP designation makes a distinction between situations when you're providing advice. You may just be talking about a certain investment portfolio, something like that, versus when you're actually talking about a planning situation. And in those cases, when you're talking about planning, you're actually required to follow a pretty heavy process on coming up with a plan. And that process has multiple steps involved. It goes from understanding the client's situation to identifying the client's goals to analyzing the current course of action and alternative course of actions and developing a formal set of recommendations, then communicating that to the client so that they understand what's the good, the bad, the ugly, and then actually implementing and coming up with a formal plan for monitoring and updating and so on. So that there's a lot that goes into the process if you decide to provide planning to a client. And as you can see, it's pretty structured as well. It does say that, these are the check boxes that are, not recommended, but required.
So I'm curious, like, have you either changed or implemented your planning process since going through the education for and studying for the exam? Have you noticed that this has helped kind of for the better, or has this become, oh, I had this gap in what I was doing?
Well, it was pretty close to what I was following. I think a lot of what I've been leaning on is probably pulled from the CFP anyway. I think, a lot of these processing steps are steps that do make sense in the RAA field. So I think that's why you might see some commonality there. But I think, yeah, each of these steps has bullet points under there, which provide, even more granular understanding of what might be included at each level. And I think even at those levels, there's some little tidbits that you can pull in that do make more sense than, if you didn't go through understanding what exactly is required for the CFP designation.
Okay. So now that you have passed the CFP exam, and kind of what is your next thought moving forward? Do you feel, because again, I before I get to that, I remember I've seen a conversation recently online between advisors, and it's like what you talked about, the general practitioner versus the cardiologist versus the urologist, and it has a really, really good analogy. And the conversation online was that the medical field has labeled the levels of expertise. That a cardiologist is not a urologist, is not a podiatrist. While they all went to medical school and they're all doctors, as a field, they've done a good job of kind of differentiating by title so that when you go to your general practitioner, you understand that's a general practitioner. But the general practitioner might refer you to a cardiologist or a podiatrist depending on your individual issue. Whereas I think that's a great example. Like the CFP is that general practitioner. It's kind of the closest thing that we would have to getting that MD. It's like not nowhere near on the scale, and I don't want it to even try to compare them. Becoming a medical doctor and going through the education requirements for that is significantly more onerous. But it's just that concept of once you become an MD, then you're a doctor. Yes, you could provide CPR and probably save someone's life and have an idea of like, oh no, you're not that sick, you don't need to go to the emergency room, even though you're a podiatrist and they have a cut on their hand. But when it comes to actual work, you're going to focus on that podiatrist, and that could be the next level of, once you have your CFP, what's the analogy of like a board certification in an individual field? And like, is there any kind of body that could merge and provide that level of specificity? Because that's what I said. That's kind of what I think of in terms of what's next. Is that I started the CFA even after I made CFP. I took the first of 3 exams, realized I was going down a path that I just didn't want to go down. So I didn't study that hard, failed the second test, and didn't ever pick it back up again. But it's like I didn't want to have to do individual stock research. But if there was something on equity compensation plans, that I'd probably pursue, because I want to think I know a pretty good amount of it already. But I am curious, is there anything after the CFP that you might be interested, or are you kind of proud with where you've gotten at this point and that you can provide the level of advice to clients that you want?
Right. It might be one of those things you might need to ask me a little bit after this kind of settles in. But at a high level, kind of where I want to
Is
go
this
with it.
the financial advisor version of uh there's a couple that's been together and parents ask, so when are you getting married? They get married and the next day, so when are you having kids? I-
Yeah, that could be
Is
it.
it is this the financial advisor version of that?
It could be. So, yeah, like in my mind, the evolution I've kind of taken is my background has been in engineering, and it certainly helped me to have that degree because there's a lot of systems and processes and technology, obviously, to work with in this type of field and automation and whatnot. Also, the investing side of things can be pretty quantitative, and it's good to have that engineering background for that. But then, the evolution I kind of took is I went towards the MBA, and that provided in finance, and that provided me a good understanding of portfolio management and things like that. And then from there, I ended up doing, like the option pricing, the derivatives, the quantitative models, and all that with the hedge fund. And I think the CFP rounded off all of the planning side, the household concern side, which I've implemented in my life, for the past 10, 15, 20 years, but having the understanding of, like I said, all those edge cases, the things that we talked about that may come up every now and then, it's certainly rounding off the corners of what might make sense to know in this field. But the next step for me, I think, is what I've been trying to do is just understand how the little pieces fit together for what makes sense for my practice. And typically this is a common step that many advisors take. There's many different areas that you can kind of start specializing in or applying to client situations, and often most advisors, frankly, they won't go deep into all of them. There's just too many. At most, choose a handful, maybe 4 or 5 is the average across most advisors. And that's probably the same for me. So there'll probably be 4 or 5 specialty areas, and those areas likely would be tied to the types of problems I like solving. And that comes down to helping individuals and professionals reach their financial independence sooner rather than later. So I've already understood that from my practice so far that a big part of that is understanding the end game. How does the estate plan fit into the picture, and then kind of working backwards. So how does tax planning fit into the picture? And then the investment side, which is kind of what I've already brought to the table based on my experience. But I think combining those three together, in my mind, would be a good way to take these more specialized concerns and put it into a package that makes the most sense for the clients I'm trying to target. So I think probably going a little deeper into the estate planning and the tax strategy side to make sure it kind of just fits into the big picture is what I'm going for with my clients, and probably what I'll be looking to learn a little or a lot more about as I evolve my business.
Yeah, that's I like that kind of almost as we kind of get ready to wrap up. I have earned a couple other designations along the way that just didn't have the same education requirements, and they were kind of I don't say too small. It was like they almost felt cheap. Like I get the feeling that these organizations are around just to make money off of these designations and kind of add to the alphabet soup that just confuses people. The CFP has been one that I've been genuinely proud of. Like, if we have a client meeting, I have my diploma from UCLA. It says Bachelor of Arts and Science in Applied Mathematics and Philosophy, and I have my CFP. Those are on the wall. Like those are the two things that I'm really proud of. And one again, I want to congratulate you, Trishul, on passing the exam and earning your CFP, because it is, yeah, I do think it's that gold standard that brings everything together. I genuinely feel comfortable that if a client comes to me, I can help them at the very least find all those unknown unknowns and turn them into unknown knowns. And that there's just so much value there of helping clients realize all the things that are possible for them or available to them based on their resources that they weren't even aware of. That wasn't part of their plan. It's not the question they asked, but I can still provide significant value to just bringing out the possibilities and the opportunities.
Right. Well, you know, I should also mention I just passed the exam, so I don't have my official results yet. So I don't have those
Okay.
letters after my name. But what I would also mention is there's a handful of steps that somebody needs to do to get the CFP beyond just the exam. You need a couple of years of experience, you need to take a bunch of courses, you need to have the right degree, and you need to, you know, keep up with the CE continuing education, and you need to sign off on the code of ethics and whatnot. So there's a handful of check boxes. At this point, I am waiting on, you know, the exam results and checking off the final remaining check boxes there. But I hope to have it soon, and then we can kind of just move on to bigger and better things. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think it was definitely worth the time and effort to kind of go through the process. When I started the business in 2019, that's like 2 years ago, I knew this would be a good priority for me to kind of check off. Uh, I know last year it didn't make the most sense to take an exam, you know, that's 7 hours in a room full of people. But luckily, they actually implemented the ability to take it from home. So that's how I was able to kind of get it done this year. And having gone through the process, I definitely think I'll be a better planner for it.
Awesome. Awesome. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, you know, I think as far as things to look for, I think there are a handful of things it does make sense to keep an eye out if you're going for, you know, if you're on the lookout for somebody to get advice from. And yeah, I think the CFP is one of them.
Yeah, I think even the CFP board, if you go to cfp.net, or I think it's Find an Advisor, has done a pretty good job of incorporating an advisor search. It doesn't turn up very well on the SEO side, but if you go to the CFP website, you can find a list of CFPs either with a certain level of expertise, certain area of expertise, or even in your area based on your geography. So that they are trying to do a better job of uh, marketing and kind of letting the general population know that yes, within the industry, the CFP is that gold standard for financial planning. Here's how you find a certified financial planner to help you uh, implement the changes and advice that you need for your life.
Yeah, good stuff. You know, the last thing I'll mention is with the designation, you're also required to have a fiduciary duty to your clients. And, you know, something we mentioned before in other episodes, the fiduciary duty is supposed to be the highest level of advice that you can get, because what it means is I'm required to put the best interests of my clients ahead, you know, not on par, but ahead of my own. And that with the CFP, that comes with a duty of loyalty, a duty of care, and a duty to follow the client's instructions. So it really tries to spell out that the client's best interests need to come first. And I think that's kind of the main gist, if we want to kind of put it concisely.
That's good. I'm almost curious. Uh, it was following the client's wishes, but also uh, putting the client's interests ahead of your own. I wonder when the client's wishes are not in their own best interest. Like,
So that's a question on the exam that pops up
oh,
every now
really?
and then.
I thought this would be like
Yeah.
a good place style ethical conundrum or philosophical conundrum. Well, okay, now I'm really curious. What was the answer, or what was your interpretation?
Well, so, at the end of the day, if the client is saying something that they want to do, your job is to basically give your recommendation, but then at the end of the day, they get to make the final decision. However,
Okay.
it stops at the point where the client wants to do something that's unlawful or grossly unreasonable. So you can't really go, 100% with that, but you can go pretty far. Basically, the clients get the final say.
Okay. So, uh, you have to try and make your recommendation, try and help them understand that what they want is not in their best interest, but it's their money, their life. They get to make the decisions, and you are their advisor, not doing this for them.
Yeah, at the end of the day, what I like to say is I'm here to provide education. I'm here to provide my best thinking, but I'm not here to be a dictator or be
Yeah.
here to command people, and that's certainly a distinction I like to make in the eyes of my clients.
Okay. Well, thank you for that final edition. I really liked the conversation today. This is a good deep dive on the CFP designation.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the chance of just digging into this, and thanks everybody for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, do spread the word. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.